My sister announced my late husband is her baby's father. I revealed his sterility. 6 months. 6 months since the world tilted on its axis, since the phone call that stole the air from my lungs and left an echoing silence where laughter used to be. James. Gone. A car accident, sudden and brutal, leaving behind a void that felt too vast to ever fill. The grief was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making every breath an effort. Days blurred into weeks, marked only by the raw, unceasing ache in my soul. I existed in a fog, navigating the mundane tasks of life on autopilot, each movement an act of sheer will. It was during this period of profound disorientation that my parents, surprisingly, stepped up. I'd always had a complicated relationship with them, a dance of unspoken expectations and subtle disappointments. They were present, yes, but often felt distant, their attention fragmented, always seemingly pulled in a dozen other directions. My achievements were met with polite nods, my struggles with well-meaning but often unhelpful advice. But when James died, something shifted. They were there, truly there. My mother, usually so reserved, held me as I sobbed, letting me soak her shoulder with tears without a single word of judgment or impatience. My father, who rarely showed overt emotion, took charge of the funeral arrangements, handling the endless logistics, the phone calls, the difficult decisions, freeing me from a burden I couldn't possibly carry. They attended every visitation, stood by my side through the service, their presence a silent, unwavering support. And then came the financial support, a gesture so unexpected it almost knocked me off balance. A few weeks after the funeral, my father sat me down, a serious expression on his face. He explained, in his typically no-nonsense manner, that they wanted to help me get back on my feet, to ensure I didn't have to worry about immediate expenses while I navigated this new, terrifying reality. They started providing me with $1,500 every month, a sum that felt enormous, a lifeline in a sea of uncertainty. It wasn't just the money, though that was a practical godsend, it was what it represented. For the very first time in my life, I felt their full, undivided attention. It was as if my grief had finally unlocked something within them, a deep reservoir of parental concern that had always seemed just out of reach. There were no caveats, no subtle judgments, no hints of obligation, just unwavering support, a quiet demonstration of love that, in my profound sorrow, felt like a small, fragile beacon of hope. They called regularly, not to pry, but to check in, to ask if I needed anything, if I was eating, if I was sleeping. My mother would drop off home-cooked meals, perfectly portioned and easy to reheat, knowing I barely had the energy to boil water. My father would offer to fix things around the house, to help with bills, anything to lighten my load. It was overwhelming, in the best possible way. This newfound attentiveness, this tangible, consistent support, was a stark contrast to the distant, often critical, dynamic of our past. And in my raw, vulnerable state, I clung to it, soaking up every ounce of their unexpected care. Then came the dinner that shifted everything, subtly at first, like the quiet turning of a tide, but with profound consequences. My younger sister, Sarah, arrived, 7 months pregnant, and glowing with that particular luminescence only expectant mothers seem to possess. She was visiting from out of town, and the dinner was meant to be a joyous reunion, a chance for us all to be together. I'd been looking forward to it, hoping for a continuation of the warmth and connection that had blossomed with my parents since James's death. From the moment Sarah walked through the door, a radiant smile on her face and a hand instinctively cradling her prominent belly, the air in the room seemed to condense around her. It was as if a spotlight had been switched on, instantly drawing every ounce of my parents' attention. Their eyes, which for months had held such focused concern for me, now sparkled with undisguised delight as they gazed upon their pregnant daughter. My mother immediately fussed over Sarah, asking about every ache and craving, her voice laced with an eager anticipation I hadn't heard in ages. My father, typically stoic, beamed, his hand resting protectively on Sarah's arm as he guided her to the most comfortable chair. The conversation, which moments before had been a comfortable, if still somewhat somber, exchange about my day and my tentative plans for the future, instantly pivoted. It was all about Sarah now, her doctor's appointments, the nursery decorations, potential baby names, the trials and tribulations of third trimester fatigue. Every question, every comment, every worried glance was directed at her, a swirling vortex of parental adoration. I sat there, at the dinner table, with my plate of food growing cold, and slowly, chillingly, I felt myself become invisible again. It wasn't overt, no one explicitly ignored me, but I might as well have been a ghost. My contributions to the conversation were met with polite, distracted nods, quickly brushed aside as my parents turned back to Sarah, their faces alight with the shared joy of impending grandparenthood. The stark contrast was a painful realization. For 6 months, in the wake of James's death, I had felt seen, supported, cherished even. It had been a revelation, a balm to my raw grief. But now, with Sarah's blossoming belly as a new focal point, that fragile attention had simply evaporated. The financial support continued, of course, the $1,500 arriving in my account each month, a testament to their continued obligation, perhaps, but the emotional warmth, the genuine engagement, the feeling of being their primary concern, that was gone, instantly eclipsed by the promise of new life. I watched them, my parents, completely absorbed by my sister, their faces radiating a happiness that felt so utterly distant from my own enduring sorrow. And in that moment, the familiar ache of being overlooked, of being secondary, settled back into my chest, heavy and unwelcome, as if it had never truly left. The feeling of invisibility gnawed at me through the rest of that dinner, and in the days that followed, it only intensified. My parents continued their unwavering devotion to Sarah and her burgeoning bump, while my grief, my very presence, seemed to recede further into the background. I tried to push past the familiar ache of neglect, to focus on Sarah's genuine happiness, but there was a nagging question, a small, persistent unease that began to surface amidst the congratulations and baby talk. One afternoon, when my parents were out, and it was just Sarah and me in the living room, I decided to ask, as gently as I could, about the child's father. It wasn't idle curiosity, not entirely. It was a natural question, given the suddenness of her pregnancy and the lack of any mention of a partner. I knew Sarah had been seeing someone casually a few months back, but nothing serious, or so I'd thought. So, Sarah, I began, trying to sound casual, my voice light. Has the baby's father been around much? Are things serious with him? I watched her face, expecting to see a blush, perhaps a shy smile, an explanation of a blossoming romance. Instead, a strange, almost unsettling expression crossed her features. She looked at me for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, before a slow, enigmatic smile spread across her lips. It wasn't a joyful smile, or a loving one. It was a secretive smile, almost sly, and it sent a shiver down my spine. "Oh," she said, her voice lilting, a little too carefree. "That's my business, isn't it?" She paused, letting the words hang in the air, then added, with a breathy, conspiratorial tone, "And besides, I made it all up." My stomach dropped. I stared at her, trying to decipher her meaning. Made what up? The father? The entire pregnancy? The ambiguity was unsettling, almost chilling. "What do you mean, you made it all up?" I pressed, a cold knot forming in my gut. My voice was sharper than I intended, betraying the sudden surge of alarm. Sarah just shrugged, her enigmatic smile widening, utterly unconcerned by my growing discomfort. She didn't elaborate, didn't offer a clarification, didn't dismiss it as a joke. She simply left the statement hanging there, a puzzle piece that didn't fit, a mystery she seemed content to let fester. Her silence, coupled with that unsettling, unreadable smile, did not inspire confidence. In fact, it did the opposite. It sparked a quiet alarm, a suspicion that something was deeply, fundamentally off about the situation. The joy I had tried to feel for her, for my parents' rediscovered attentiveness, began to curdle into a vague unease, a sense of foreboding about what exactly Sarah was hiding, and why she felt the need to be so deliberately vague, so utterly unforthcoming, about something so profoundly significant. The cryptic comment about making it all up lingered in my mind, a sour aftertaste to every interaction with Sarah. It was a dissonant note in the otherwise perfect symphony of my parents' joy over her pregnancy. Despite the unease, despite feeling increasingly pushed to the periphery, a part of me, the part that still longed for a connection with my sister, clung to a desperate hope for normalcy, for genuine sisterhood. That's why, when Sarah extended an invitation to her baby shower, I was genuinely surprised, and a flicker of that hope reignited. The invitation came during a casual phone call, mostly dominated by Sarah recounting the latest triumphs of her prenatal yoga class. Then, almost as an afterthought, she said, "Oh, and by the way, I'm having a little get-together, a sort of baby party, next month. Nothing formal, just a few friends and family. You should come." My initial reaction was a surge of relief, a small, quiet thrill. Maybe this was it. Maybe the shift in our dynamic wasn't permanent. Maybe this was an olive branch, a signal that she still wanted me in her life, despite the overwhelming attention she was receiving from our parents. It had been a long time since we'd shared a truly unburdened moment, a conversation that wasn't filtered through the lens of parental favoritism or my own grief. I immediately agreed, my voice perhaps a little too eager. Yes, of course. I'd love to. I tried to inject a casualness into my tone, but inside, I was already envisioning the possibilities. This could be our chance to talk, really talk, away from the watchful eyes and ever-present doting of our parents. Maybe I could ask her again about the baby's father, in a less confrontational way, and she would finally offer a straightforward explanation. More importantly, perhaps this party was a signal that she valued our sisterly bond, that she hadn't forgotten about me in the excitement of her impending motherhood. I hoped it would be an opportunity to mend the subtle cracks that had formed, to rebuild some semblance of the closeness we once shared before life, and our parents' fluctuating attention had driven a wedge between us. I wanted to be happy for her, truly, deeply happy, and I hoped this party would provide the space for that genuine sentiment to finally bloom. The invitation felt like a small, unexpected reprieve, a chance to bridge the growing distance, and I clung to that hope with a quiet desperation. The baby shower was everything I had hoped it wouldn't be, and everything I secretly feared. My parents were in their element, doting on Sarah, cooing over miniature onesies, and regaling guests with saccharine anecdotes about Sarah's journey. I tried to engage, to participate in the forced cheer, but the vague unease from her, "I made it all up" comment clung to me, a persistent whisper of foreboding. The air was thick with polite chatter and the rustle of wrapping paper, a typical festive gathering, until it wasn't. After all the gifts had been opened, a mountain of pastel-colored baby items piled high on a nearby table, Sarah stood up, patting her rounded belly. A hush fell over the room, as people anticipated a heartfelt thank you speech, a sweet anecdote about motherhood. My parents beamed at her, their faces radiating pride. Sarah took a deep breath, a theatrical pause, and then her voice, clear and surprisingly strong, cut through the quiet. "Father," she began, her gaze fixed directly on my dad, who looked on with an indulgent smile. "I have a very important announcement to make." The smile never left his face, but a subtle tension entered the room, a collective leaning forward from the guests. And then she delivered the words that shattered the illusion of normalcy, the words that would echo in my mind for weeks, twisting everything I thought I knew into a grotesque, unrecognizable shape. "This baby," she proclaimed, her hand resting on her stomach, a triumphant glint in her eyes. "This is James Wilson's child, Karen's late husband." The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating. Every breath caught in every throat. My own blood ran cold, turning to ice in my veins. The name, James Wilson, hung in the air like a phantom, utterly out of place, utterly horrifying. My James, my dead husband, the man I was still grieving, the man whose absence was a gaping wound in my soul. My mind reeled, grasping for a rational explanation, but there was none. My parents' faces, moments ago alight with joy, were now frozen in masks of bewilderment, slowly shifting to something akin to horror. David, Sarah's former casual boyfriend, who was also present, looked utterly dumbfounded, his mouth slightly agape. Before anyone could even begin to process the monstrous claim, Sarah continued, her voice gaining a chillingly detached, almost legalistic tone. "And as James's sole heir," she announced, looking directly at me, a cold, calculating gleam replacing the earlier triumph in her eyes. "My child is therefore entitled to half of Karen's inheritance." The words were a physical blow, stripping the air from my lungs. Half of my inheritance, half of James's legacy, the very security I had for myself, for us. The audacity, the calculated malice of it, was breathtaking. It wasn't just a claim, it was an accusation, a public declaration of a twisted, unimaginable lie designed to steal not just money, but my very sanity. The room erupted into a flurry of shocked whispers, gasps, and horrified murmurs. But all I could see was Sarah's face, a triumphant, almost predatory smile now fully formed on her lips, and the dawning, gut-wrenching realization that this wasn't just about money or attention. This was about something far darker, far more sinister than I could have ever conceived. The shock of Sarah's monstrous announcement still reverberated through the stunned silence of the living room. My blood ran cold, and a dizzying wave of nausea washed over me. James, my James. The very idea was an unthinkable sacrilege, a vile desecration of his memory. My parents, who had just moments before been beaming with paternal pride, now looked like statues, their faces slowly morphing from confusion to a dawning, horrifying belief as Sarah's words fully sank in. Before I could even articulate the strangled protest forming in my throat, Before the gasps and murmurs of the other guests could fully erupt into outright chaos, my parents, with a sickeningly swift betrayal, pivoted. My mother, her eyes wide, but now with a strange, almost fearful intensity, reached for Sarah's arm. My father, his face grim and set, nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if processing some long-hidden truth. There was no questioning, no challenging Sarah's outrageous claim. No, their reaction was one of immediate, chilling acceptance, a stark contrast to the disbelief that was clearly etched on the faces of the other partygoers. It was as if Sarah's words, however outlandish, held some inherent, unquestionable authority for them. Then, with a triumphant, venomous glint in her eyes, Sarah produced her evidence. She reached into her small, elegant clutch bag and pulled out her phone, her fingers moving with surprising speed. The screen lit up, and she thrust it forward, not just to my parents, but angling it so that several guests, including me, could see. What flashed across the screen was a series of images, each one a fresh, agonizing stab to my heart. There was James, my James, and there was Sarah. In the photos, they were close, far too close for siblings-in-law. One showed them laughing, heads thrown back, an intimacy in their shared gaze that made my stomach churn. Another depicted James with his arm around Sarah's waist, a casual, familiar gesture that felt like a punch to the gut. And then, the ultimate betrayal. A photo, grainy and slightly out of focus, but undeniably clear, of James leaning in, his lips pressed against Sarah's. It wasn't a quick peck, it was a lingering, undeniable kiss. Each image was a hammer blow, shattering the carefully reconstructed fragments of my life, tearing open the raw wound of my grief and pouring salt into it. My mind screamed in protest, refusing to reconcile the loving, loyal husband I knew with the man in these devastating photographs. Sarah's voice, now dripping with a malicious satisfaction, cut through the buzzing in my ears. "He was going to leave you," she declared, her words echoing in the stunned silence of the room. "He told me he was planning to tell you, to start a new life with me and our baby." She punctuated her claim with a dismissive wave towards me, as if I were a distant, irrelevant figure in their sordid drama. The accusation, delivered with such cold conviction, twisted my insides into knots. Devastation isn't a strong enough word. It was as if the ground beneath my feet had crumbled, plunging me into an abyss of disbelief and unbearable pain. The grief for James, which I had been slowly, painstakingly, learning to carry, now morphed into a grotesque monster of betrayal. The images, the accusation, my parents' chillingly immediate acceptance, it was too much. My world, already shattered by loss, splintered into a million more agonizing pieces, leaving me gasping for air in a nightmare I couldn't escape. The images of James and Sarah, the venomous declaration that he was leaving me, my parents' chilling acceptance, it all converged into a suffocating wave of nausea and disbelief. The room, once filled with polite chatter, now buzzed with horrified whispers, but the sounds were distant, muffled, as if I were underwater. My entire being screamed in protest. This couldn't be real. James, my steadfast, loving James, wouldn't do this. He couldn't. Without a conscious thought, driven by an instinct for self-preservation, I simply turned and ran. I didn't grab my coat, didn't say goodbye, didn't even acknowledge the horrified stares following me. I just fled, bursting out of the suffocating warmth of the house and into the cold, sharp night air. The chill was a welcome shock against my burning face, and I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so violently I could barely unlock the door. I threw myself inside, starting the engine with a roar, and sped away from the house, leaving behind the nightmare of shattered trust and betrayal. The drive home was a blur of tears and ragged breaths. My phone, which I had tossed onto the passenger seat, buzzed incessantly, its screen lighting up with notifications. I glanced at it, and a fresh wave of agony washed over me. It was Sarah's phone, connected to my car's Bluetooth, and the messages were flashing across the display. Texts, notifications from social media. All of them, purportedly from James. "Can't wait to start our new life," one read. Another, "Soon, my love, soon." They were like daggers, twisted into the gaping wound in my chest. Each ping, each flash of his name, felt like a fresh confirmation of the unthinkable. My mind reeled, trapped in a horrifying loop of those images, Sarah's triumphant smirk, and the crushing weight of her claims. It was too much. The pain was unbearable, a physical ache that permeated every cell of my being. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning in the empty bed that still smelled faintly of James. The messages from Sarah's phone replayed in my mind, mocking me, whispering doubts into the sanctity of our shared life. Dawn broke, painting the sky in a muted, indifferent gray, mirroring the landscape of my soul. I knew I needed answers, even if they destroyed me. With trembling fingers, I called my parents. My mother answered, her voice tight, strained, devoid of its usual forced cheer. "Mom," I choked out, my voice raw from weeping. "Tell me the truth. Is it true? About James and Sarah? Did you know?" There was a long, agonizing pause on the other end, filled only with the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then, my father's voice, grim and heavy, cut in. "Yes, Karen. We did." The words were a quiet, devastating blow, far worse than any shouted accusation. "We've known for about 6 months," he admitted, his voice flat, devoid of apology or remorse. "Sarah told us everything. 6 months. 6 months of their unwavering support, their sudden financial aid, their feigned concern, all while knowing this monstrous secret, this betrayal that now made a mockery of my grief, of everything I thought our family was." The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Their attention, their generosity, it hadn't been genuine solace. It had been a calculated deception, a way to keep me quiet, perhaps to ensure I didn't ask too many questions while they quietly condoned, or even facilitated, this grotesque affair. The anger that surged through me then was a cold, pure flame, burning away the last vestiges of love and respect I had for them. There was no more hurt, just a profound, searing fury. Without another word, I hung up the phone. My fingers, steady now with a cold resolve, navigated to their contacts. First my mother, then my father, then Sarah. I blocked them all, severing the digital ties as definitively as the emotional ones had just been broken. Then, I opened my banking app. With a few decisive taps, I canceled the recurring monthly money transfer, the $1,500 that had once felt like a lifeline, but now tasted like ash in my mouth, a dirty payment for their complicity. The act was final, absolute. My world was still shattered, but at least now, I knew the full extent of the wreckage, and I was finally ready to start rebuilding it, alone, but free from their toxic deceit. The days following the Christmas party and my definitive cutoff of my parents and Sarah were a strange mix of profound relief and simmering dread. The silence from them was a balm, a quiet peace I hadn't realized I craved so desperately. But beneath that newfound calm, a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach with each passing hour. Sarah's declaration at the party, her absurd claim to James's inheritance, still echoed in my mind, a chilling reminder of her malice. I tried to dismiss it as the ravings of a desperate, manipulative woman, but the vividness of those photos, the sickening feeling they had evoked, lingered. My fragile peace shattered 2 weeks later with the arrival of a thick, official-looking envelope. The moment I saw the law firm's letterhead, a cold dread seized me. My hands trembled as I tore it open, and the words inside blurred before my eyes. Notice of paternity and claim for inheritance. Sarah was suing me. She was actually doing it, demanding half of everything James had left me, alleging that her unborn child was his. The audacity of it was staggering, but the legal jargon, the cold, formal language, made it terrifyingly real. My breath caught in my throat, a wave of panic washing over me. This wasn't just a family squabble anymore. This was a war, and it was being fought on legal ground. I scrambled to find a lawyer, my mind racing through names, frantically searching for someone who could help me navigate this impossible nightmare. I found Richard Martinez, a family law attorney with a reputation for being sharp and tenacious. Our first meeting was a blur of recounting the horrifying events, the party, the photos, my parents' complicity, Sarah's bizarre confession about making it all up. I watched his face as I spoke, looking for a flicker of reassurance, a sign that he saw the absurdity of it all. He listened patiently, his expression unreadable, occasionally scribbling notes on a legal pad. When I finished, the silence in his office was heavy. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady, analytical. "Ms. Hayes," he began, his voice calm, but with an underlying seriousness that chilled me to the bone. "I understand this is incredibly distressing, and your story certainly paints a picture of extreme manipulation." He paused, taking a breath. "However," and that however felt like a punch to the gut, "Sarah, or rather her legal counsel, has presented what they are calling compelling evidence." He pushed a file across the desk towards me, its contents mirroring the horror show Sarah had orchestrated at the party. There were copies of the very photos she had displayed, enlarged and clearer than I remembered. There were also printed screenshots of text messages, purportedly from James to Sarah, filled with declarations of love and promises of a future together, alongside what looked like financial transaction records. small sums transferred from an account named JW to Sarah's. These, combined with the fact that she's 7 months pregnant, make for a very difficult case, Richard explained, his voice devoid of judgment, but heavy with the weight of legal reality. The court will likely order a paternity test, of course, but until then, her claims, particularly with this so-called evidence, present a significant challenge. My stomach churned. The world felt like it was tilting again, only this time, it wasn't grief, but a cold, hard fear that threatened to consume me. This wasn't just about money. It was about James's memory, about his integrity, and about protecting the last remnants of our life together from Sarah's toxic lies. The drive home from Richard Martinez's office was cloaked in a chilling silence, heavier than any grief I had known. Sarah's compelling evidence played on a loop in my mind. The photos, the fabricated texts, the cold, hard reality of a lawsuit. My world, already shattered by James's death and my family's betrayal, now felt like it was crumbling into dust under the weight of this fresh, insidious lie. How could I fight something that seemed so meticulously constructed, so utterly vile? I spent the evening in a fog, the dinner untouched, my gaze fixed on the darkening sky outside my window. The phone, which had been a source of such dread just hours before, lay silent beside me. Then, just as the last vestiges of twilight faded, it rang. An unknown number. My first instinct was to ignore it, to retreat further into my self-pitying despair, but something compelled me to answer. "Hello," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Karen." A woman's voice, hesitant but firm, responded. "My name is Elizabeth Parker. I'm James's mother." The phone almost slipped from my grasp. James's mother? My mind reeled, trying to process the words. James had always told me he was an orphan, that his parents had died when he was very young, leaving him with no living relatives. It was a detail, a tragic part of his past, that I had accepted without question, a piece of his story that had always made me feel a deeper empathy for him. Yet another lie, a cold, hard truth adding to the growing mountain of deceit. James's mother? I repeated, my voice barely a whisper, filled with a mixture of disbelief and a sudden, sharp surge of hope. Could this stranger offer some clarity, some shred of truth in the suffocating darkness? "Yes," she confirmed, her voice softening slightly. "I know this must be a shock, Karen. I apologize for the intrusion, especially now, but I heard what your sister is claiming." Her words were punctuated by a sigh, heavy with a weariness that resonated with my own. And I couldn't stand by. James, he couldn't have children. My breath hitched. "What?" I asked, a desperate plea for elaboration. "He was sterile," Elizabeth stated, her voice gentle but firm. "Completely. It was diagnosed about 10 years ago, after an accident he had. It was a difficult time for him. He kept it very private, very close to his chest." My mind flashed back to distant memories, times when the topic of children would arise, and James would become uncharacteristically quiet, or quickly change the subject. I had always attributed it to his difficult past, his fear of bringing a child into a world without a stable family foundation. It was never discussed in depth, and I never pushed. Now, a cold, clinical explanation filled the void. "I have the medical records," Elizabeth continued, her voice gaining a renewed purpose. "Dated back 10 years. They explicitly state complete azoospermia, permanently sterile. There is no possibility, Karen. James could not have fathered a child." The words hit me like a revelation, shattering the nightmare I had been living and replacing it with a breathtaking sense of vindication. James couldn't have children. The evidence, the accusations, Sarah's entire monstrous claim, it was all a house of cards. A wave of relief, so profound it bordered on euphoria, washed over me, displacing the fear and the agony. This wasn't just my word against hers. This was medical fact. This was irrefutable proof. Sarah's elaborate, cruel scheme was about to unravel, and with it, the insidious lies that had threatened to consume me. The courtroom felt cold, sterile, and utterly surreal. Sarah, dressed in somber black, played the role of the grieving widow with theatrical precision, her voice soft and tearful as she spun her fabricated tale of a secret love affair with James, punctuated by the doctored photos and fabricated messages. My parents sat behind her, grim-faced, lending their silent, unwavering support to her performance, their betrayal still a raw wound in my heart. The air was thick with tension, and the judge, a stern-faced woman, listened intently to every word, her expression unreadable. Then, it was our turn. Richard Martinez, my lawyer, rose, his presence calm and commanding. He didn't waste time on emotional appeals. Instead, he simply presented the irrefutable, undeniable truth, James's medical records. He laid out the documented diagnosis of complete azoospermia, the unequivocal proof that James was permanently sterile. The shift in the courtroom was palpable. Sarah's composure faltered, her tearful act dissolving into a pale, anxious mask. My parents stiffened, their gazes darting nervously between the judge and the documents. The judge examined the records carefully, her brow furrowed, then looked directly at Sarah. "Given this evidence," she stated, her voice clear and firm, "the court must order a DNA test, not between the minor child and the deceased Mr. Wilson, but between the minor child and Mrs. Elizabeth Parker." The unexpected turn caught everyone off guard. Sarah's face went white. Elizabeth, who had accompanied me and sat quietly by my side, looked stunned but resolute. The order was given, the test quickly administered, and the waiting began, a nail-biting period of suspended disbelief. The results came back swiftly, unequivocally sealing Sarah's fate and dismantling her elaborate web of lies. Richard, with a quiet triumph, presented them to the court. The report was concise, clinical, and devastating for Sarah. "There is no genetic link between the minor child and Mrs. Elizabeth Parker." The words hung in the air, confirming the obvious truth. Elizabeth was indeed James's mother, and by extension, the child was not James's. Sarah's monstrous claim, built on deceit and manipulation, crumbled into dust. Faced with irrefutable proof, her carefully constructed facade finally shattered. Her eyes darted wildly around the courtroom, finally landing on my parents, a desperate, silent plea for help that would not come. Then, in a choked whisper, she confessed. I was involved with several men," she stammered, her voice cracking, the false bravado completely gone. I just wanted security for my child. I thought this was the only way." Her admission was pathetic, a desperate attempt to garner sympathy, but it only solidified the depth of her deception. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. The court ruled entirely in my favor, dismissing Sarah's frivolous lawsuit and condemning her egregious misconduct. A wave of profound relief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. It wasn't just about the money. It was about James's honor, about clearing his name, and about reclaiming the sanctity of our life together from Sarah's vile narrative. As I left the courtroom, victorious but emotionally drained, my parents approached me, their faces etched with a desperate, pleading expression. "Karen, please," my mother whispered, her hand reaching out. "We need you. We need the money. We can't." But their words were just background noise, the fading echoes of a life I no longer belonged to. I simply walked past them, not a flicker of regret or hesitation in my stride. Their pleas for money, for connection, felt hollow and manipulative, the final, desperate gasp of a relationship built on conditional love and self-interest. I stepped out into the crisp air, leaving behind the toxicity, the lies, and the painful memories. Elizabeth Parker, James's true mother, stood waiting, a small, knowing smile on her face. In the months that followed, she became more than just a biological link to James. She became a true mother to me, a loving, supportive presence I had never truly had. We built a new life together, one filled with honesty, respect, and unconditional love. The pain of James's loss still lingered, a quiet ache, but the overwhelming sense of betrayal had been replaced by a profound sense of peace and freedom. I had shed the burdensome weight of a toxic past, and finally, truly, begun to heal, surrounded by the genuine love and unwavering support of a family I had found, rather than one I was born into.